Welcome to Module 4, Open Educational Resources. In this module, we're going to discuss the history and application of open educational resources, or OERs, in K-12 virtual education. And then we're going to give you some great examples of how you can use OERs in your classes with students of all ages. Now, OERs, or open educational resources, these are educational materials that have been created by educational organizations or educational companies interested in promoting positive education. Usually OERs are created by higher education institutions all around the world, although the majority of them are in English, and they're usually focused on a high school or college-age student, although there are some great ones that have been submitted and shared for kids under 13. Now, these materials are freely accessible, they're openly licensed, they're explicitly licensed so you know how you can repurpose them, and they're generally chunked in pieces so that you can introduce them into your lessons where appropriate. A little bit of the history of OERs. In 1994, the idea of a learning object actually emerged, and a learning object being a learning experience or learning activity has a collection of objects, and there's these individual objects. It could be a textbook or a paragraph in a textbook. It could be a discussion that you have students have. It could be a project that they do. That learning experiences are chunked into learning objects. So this concept of learning objects came out, and that possibly those learning objects could be reusable or interoperable. Well then, in 1998, this idea of open content began to emerge, particularly with David Wiley, where learning objects should be shared openly, or it should be about how can you go get resources and how can we help one another as educators get great resources to incorporate in our classes from experts around the world. In 2001, Creative Commons was founded, and they created licensing structure around this open content so that you can get a sense of not only how do I access it, but more importantly, how can I reuse it in my classes? And at the same time, MIT announced their OpenCourseWare initiative. This was their initiative where they wanted to release all of the content associated with all of their courses taught at MIT openly to the public. There wouldn't be teaching attached to it, but the course content itself could be released so that anybody could essentially take an MIT course. Well, this evolved. All of this evolved, and then in 2002, the idea of open educational resources was defined. This was actually defined by UNESCO as an effort to help bring education to countries that don't have access to the same kinds of experts or research institutions like we do in developing countries. And then in 2008, so all of this is developing these learning objects. Sites are starting to create themselves or organizations are creating sites where people are sharing these materials. And then in 2008, the OpenCourseWare Consortium emerges. And it becomes an independent nonprofit focused on sharing open resources throughout the world in a very easy to use and very transparent way. Since then, millions of open resources have been created, shared, and used in classrooms all over the world with students of all ages. Now, a couple of key sites for you to go check out these open resources. The first is one that I mentioned in our history, MIT OpenCourseWare. They've evolved their collection from just the content in the courses, which is great in and of itself in its classes, to videos and self-standing courses that teachers could go implement, great resources. I recently watched something that came out of MIT OpenCourseWare out of one of their labs, and it was this kind of like a television show, but still focused on science and how to create crystals in the lab. And it was fascinating and engaging and very well produced. So they have great resources. I would say the majority of their resources aimed at high school and older, but a great place for some of those more in-depth expert kinds of resources that you may want to bring into your virtual classes, particularly if you're teaching K-12 virtual education where students do a lot of independent study. These could be great resources for them as they're pathing their own learning. The second one was also mentioned in my history, and that's the OpenCourseWare Consortium. The OpenCourseWare Consortium, once again, collects probably the most international collection of OERs, and they have a lot of great videos and lessons and assignments and other things that they share on their website, very easily searchable by language, by topic area, and even by institution. So I encourage you to go check out their resources. Once again, the majority of their resources are probably high school and older, although they do have some younger age stuff that could be used depending on what kinds of subjects you were teaching. The third site is MERLOT. MERLOT came out of a California state initiative and has emerged into a learning object repository. So not only does MERLOT have resources, but those resources are tagged and lesson outcomes associated with those. So you get a little more context in how you might want to use those learning resources. In MERLOT, you're going to see a much broader range of resources applicable for students from age 5 till age 50 as an adult learner. So you get a lot more resources, particularly if you're teaching younger age kids, that you can use. And also these resources are tagged for how to reuse them, how to download them and use them in your environment, and who's managed them. The last resource is OpenStax CNX, or this was originally Connections. And this came out of this idea that learning objects should not just be an individual object, but there should be that context, like we talked about with MERLOT. And that there should be actually ways for teachers to share entire courses and the teaching methodologies around those courses. So not everything in Connections is a complete package course, but there's quite a few in there. And once again, most of this for like high school and older, or age 13 and older, but there could be some stuff in there that you could use with slightly younger students as well. All four of these resources are great resources for you guys to tap into as you are looking to implement open education resources in your class. Now, some of the strengths of using open resources. They're generally created by educators, used by educators, for educators. That's a good thing. They also tend to be chunked, and in some of those sites, even aligned to standards or learning objectives or learning outcomes. So you can get a very discrete idea of how and in what setting you might want to use particular resources. They are readily available on the internet. Many of them are low bandwidth, so we're not talking a lot of very high-end, fancy videos that take a lot of bandwidth or are hard to get to. Most of these resources are super easy to either link to or download and repurpose in very few steps. Also, the great thing about OERs is they tend to be very clearly licensed. As I mentioned in the beginning, Creative Commons has established a licensing protocol around how to reuse open resources. We'll talk about that in a second. And it's usually very clearly licensed, so you know you're not going to get in copyright trouble. Some of the challenges, though, with OERs, some of them are actually similar to the strengths. Some of them may need modification. There's been a debate in the community about how really reusable are learning objects. Or do you need to make some slight modifications or even more in-depth modifications to those resources in order to have them fit appropriately into your own teaching and learning? You know, I think there's pros and cons to that debate. And really, though, at the end of the day, just be prepared that as you're finding resources, you may have to modify some of those. So build in some of that time. One of the challenges is also one of the strengths. They're chunked. So if a teacher's looking for an out-of-the-box course, although I mentioned Connections and there's some other places where you can find those like MOOCs, it can be hard. So you still need to go piece together what you want, although that gives you control. So once again, it could be a strength, it could be a challenge. A lot of times they'll lack context. And that's okay, because you don't necessarily want to be thinking about how to use an OER in just one way. But that can be hard for you then to find things that apply appropriately to your own context. Translating them may be difficult. So thinking about that context issue as you're going into looking for things will be really important. And they're dispersed. They're hard to find sometimes. I've given you 4 great sites to go find things, but there's lots of them all over the place. And so just trying to find them and knowing that they're good, and then most importantly, knowing that they're current can be challenging. Many of these are resources that were created once and may have not been updated. So just looking and finding what you prefer, what's specific to your discipline, and what you know you can trust as current is important. Now, I mentioned Creative Commons licensing. Creative Commons licensing is used most often by OERs. You'll see it also used when you're searching in Google for particular resources, or Flickr, or Wikimedia Commons. It's a great way to understand how you can use resources. It's basically a public copyright license. And this is important because it not only affects how you use resources, but then how you would contribute your own resources, which I encourage you all to do. It's great to have opportunities to share with other educators great tools in your own teaching. Now, Creative Commons came out in 2002, and it's evolved to have options. And there's different combinations of licensing that you can have in Creative Commons. But basically, the licensing addresses 3 different kinds of options that any individual item can have. One, it's whether or not you need to attribute. So do you need to say who created that somewhere visibly in the content or setting that you're reusing it in? The second is, can you or can you not remix it or modify it? So does it have to stay intact or can you change it? And then the third is, can you commercialize it? So can it be used in a non-commercial setting or a commercial setting? So can you make money off of how you've repurposed that tool? The commercialization is probably the one that's the most limiting. I would say most OERs are not commercializable, if that's a word. And so you probably won't find a lot in that space, but you can definitely find tons of resources that it's just about attributing. And you can find a fair amount of resources out there that actually let you even modify them. So just pay attention to those licenses, and if you go to the Creative Commons website, you'll see a great graphic that shows all the combinations of those different licenses and what they mean. And this becomes important not only for how you use these resources, but how you may contribute your own resources too. And you get to decide your own licensing. Now let's just take a minute to step back and think about what we've learned in this session. We've talked a lot about open education resources and where you might go and find them, but let's think about how you also might choose to use them. In one example, you might want to give your more advanced students, you have 2 students in your virtual class and they're advanced, and you need to give them more robust or rigorous work than the rest of your class is working on. How might you go search for those materials and find those materials that you could use to keep those students engaged and continue to encourage them to grow their skills while still focusing your core curriculum on your class?